Okay, great. Welcome to Startup Tea Talk.
Good to see you again. Thank you, David.
Okay, I know foundation capital for a while, but maybe you can tell us about your work. What is the foundation capital you mentioned?
Right. So Foundation Capital is a 21-year-old venture capital firm. We're based in Menlo Park. We're unusual in that we were founded by a woman, especially unusual, we were founded by a woman in 1995, Catherine Gould, and then also our partners Bill Elmore and Jim Anderson. The firm really evolved out of another firm called Merrill Pickard, Anderson and Iyer. That firm broke up in 1995, and two firms came out of that, Foundation Capital and Benchmark Capital. Foundation now has 8 funds. We're in our 8th fund. We have just over $3 billion under management. We work primarily in early stage, so about 2/3 of the investments we've made in our history are Series A investments or seed investments. But not surprisingly, some of our most famous investments like Netflix and NetZero and Lending Club and others, MobileIron, Chegg, were Series B or Series C because the companies were already underway and we just kind of climbed on as they were becoming successful. We're all ex-operating executives. I'm somewhat typical of Foundation. I spent my operating career helping to start 2 software companies. One was a company called Pure Software that made software tools. I don't know how many, are any of you engineers who've worked in C or C++? Anybody who's ever used Purify? So Purify was this sort of miraculous product that my friend Reed Hastings had invented. And when he invented it, it's a different story, but we met in a hot tub. That was a few years before. And he called and said, hey, I've invented this cool thing. Do you want to be like my business partner and go help to try to bring this to market? And after some fits and starts, I ended up joining him. We took Pure Software public in 1995. It ended up being worth a few $1 billion before it eventually got acquired by IBM. And then when I finished there, my venture capital partner, Andy Ratcliffe, who was at Merrill Pickard, had now gone on to start Benchmark Capital. And so he called me and said, hey, I've got the next thing for you. It's this thing called Kana. And it's going to answer all the email for corporations. And I was like, how big of a problem is that? You know? And turned out to be a really big problem. So I went to be the #2 executive at Kana. And the timing was great. So I joined there in 1997. We went public in September of 1999. By February of 2000, we hit a $9 billion market cap, on $14 million in trailing quarterly revenue. So I describe our investment chart, our market cap chart, looks like a hypodermic needle because it goes up like this and then it goes straight down. And right about the time it was doing this, I was ready to leave. I'd been there for over 3 years. And I was invited to join Foundation Capital, and that was about 15 years ago. And so I'm one of the 4 general partners at Foundation, and that's what I do now. And then David was kind enough to introduce us to our first Chinese investor 2 years ago. And I took the meeting with a little bit of reluctance because we'd never had a Chinese investor before, and the group was very serious, and they wrote a big check in a hurry. And so I said, you call, I'll answer. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, great. So 14 years, not 50, you said 50 years?
Yeah.
50 years in Foundation, that's a pretty long time. You must have played many different roles in Foundation. What type of roles or responsibilities you had in Foundation Capital?
Well, I think our model is that we pick people out from industry, and so you start in a role that at that time we called a venture partner. And venture partner is a weird title because sometimes it means people who are winding down. In our case, it meant people who are winding up. And so I spent about a year in that role just learning the industry, and I didn't make any investments. I just met with some companies, and I went on and visited some boards of other companies and just tried to learn what was going on. When I look back on it now, my partner Mike Hsu, who's the guy who did the Netflix investment for us, who's a great guy, he was one of the guys who recruited me, and he said, we want you here because you have such a great network of people, of entrepreneurs that you've met over your career. And I didn't really understand the value of that. And now I do, because when I look back on the companies that I brought in the first 3 years I was there, those companies have now worked out to be worth about $15 or $16 billion in that time period. Unfortunately, I only did one of those, but I didn't do all the other ones because I had this weird impression when I got there that every day I would just see some great company like Pure Software or Kana, and I learned that I was really lucky in my operating career. And you have much more of a distribution of outcomes, more of a bell curve distribution of outcomes when you go into venture. And occasionally you get lucky enough, and I've been fortunate I've gotten lucky enough to keep doing it.
Okay, great. So, I mean, were you bored during the 15 years?
I'm sorry, what?
Were you bored?
Bored? Not bored. It's just, it's different. There's a behavior that occurs when you're an operating executive and then you move into venture. And for me especially, because I'd run sales and marketing, so I had been the person responsible for bringing revenue into my companies. And so that's a certain personality. It's a very, I'm a 97% extrovert according to Myers-Briggs, which means my wife calls me the puppy in the dog park, right? I like people, I like meeting people, I'm not afraid to do that. I'm actually less comfortable alone than I am with people. And so that's the definition really of an extrovert. And introverts have a different behavior. And so for me, you know, I was comfortable with the fact that I knew a lot of different people and I could go do it. So the first couple of years were very exciting because instead of me going out and having to ask somebody to write a check and give me money, which is what I did, you know, well enough to help these companies end up being worth a lot of money, I was able to sit and listen to people come to me and say, I want your money, I want you to write a check. And there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of kind of readjustment of your mind that takes place. I made the mistake of commenting when Ben Horowitz, who I've known from my operating career, when Ben and Mark started Andreessen Horowitz, and I made a mistake of commenting in the New York Times. I said they better be careful because when you're an operating person, it's different than when you're an investor. And it made it sound like I was like predicting failure, which of course I wasn't. I was just saying be careful because for a while everything sounds great because you're on the other side of the table. It's just really nice to have people come to you as opposed to you're always having to go to them. And then you have to adjust to that, and eventually you figure out sort of a methodology, a thesis that you operate under, and then once you kind of get that happening, I would say for me that happened kind of in like my 7th or 8th year of doing it. Then once I kind of got that down, it's gotten easier.
So you enjoy being the investor side. How long are you going to be an investor?
Well, I'll probably be an investor the rest of my life. I don't know how long I'll be full-time doing venture capital. I think that, you know, there's a risk, and a lot of firms have suffered from this risk where people just stay around too long. You know, it's hard. I'm 56 years old, and it's hard to stay current on everything, you know, and that's the, you know, I used to use my young colleagues, you know, when I was working at these startups, and now I use my children to like find out what's happening. I have 3 teenage daughters, and so there's a point at which, you know, you're just constantly having to kind of relearn. That's why I have so much respect for venture capitalists like Fred Wilson and Reed Dennis and others who've done this for many, many years and managed to stay very current in doing it. I think that's hard to do. I've been lucky, you know, my network has stayed intact, and sometimes now I'm not talking to the people I work with, I'm talking to their son or their daughter, but, you know, I can adjust.
Cool. So in terms of stay current, what type of companies you are hunting for or you are hoping to invest right now?
Yeah. So I'll go through the last handful of companies that I've invested in, and then you can decide whether or not you think they sound like they're going to be good. So I have, and then some I can name and some I just have to make reference to. So I have a company called Peerspace. I don't know if any of you guys anybody does event management, but if you do, some people know Peerspace. So it's P-E-E-R space. And it's kind of like an Airbnb for events.
Oh yeah, actually I saw that. When I searched for venue like last month, I did actually went to this website.
Awesome. So I put my house on Peerspace. I put my office on Peerspace. I'm trying to put my children's school on Peerspace, right?
Wow.
So I've received $500,000 worth of inquiries for my house in the last 12 months on Peerspace. So what Peerspace does is they allow you, no offense, I'm sure the price is right on this room, but you don't do meetings in rooms like this. You do meetings in really cool locations like lofts and factories and warehouses and music studios and bars and clubs and people's houses. So they do, there's an entrepreneur there named Ronnie Tremash who's a former gamer from EA who started the company. And they light up dark spaces. So they find dark spaces, spaces that haven't reached the commercial market yet. Very much like Airbnb, right? You know, people didn't have their spare bedroom or their houses on Airbnb until recently. And what Peerspace is doing is they're doing that for more commercial entities, for offsites, for meetings, maybe for weddings, birthdays, and things like that. So we just hosted a Peerspace event at Foundation Capital. We hosted Michael and Susan Dell. They did their big outreach to their global network of people they're funding through their foundation. And they had it in our courtyard. And they rented our space for 2 days. And we lined up all the capabilities for them and the catering and food and things like that. And it's a very exciting company. The company that grew almost 500% last year.
Wow, 500%.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of new, current new technology companies, how do you find these companies?
Well, in the case of Peerspace, I have a younger partner who, you know, as I explain it to people, I don't go to the raves and stay there till 4 a.m., but we do have people who do, and that's helpful. So I had a younger partner, and he said, hey, look, I know this guy, he's doing this thing, and for me at least it resonated, because I've been planning events and meetings for decades, and I hate it. Everybody who does it, anybody who's planning an event, you hate it. It's boring, you get stuck in the basement of the Hilton Hotel, and you eat rubber chicken. So I found it exciting, and then once we looked at the company and met the people, I thought they could be people that could build something very interesting. And so in that case, I was introduced. I have a more recent investment, 2 more recent investments. So I invest in both consumer and in IT, which initially when I started, I thought I should only do IT because that's what I know. And then Catherine Gould, who's our founder, who sadly passed away last year, she said, look, you should just release yourself from that constriction, because you just know good people. And good people are going to show up and they're going to say to you, so for example, I told this story earlier today, I was playing poker, and I play at kind of a high level amateur poker, and so I was playing with other guys who were kind of like my level. And we were playing in this game, and one of the players, who's now an investor, he said, hey look, there's this company, and they're doing Netflix for college textbooks, you should go look at it. They're just starting out. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. And so I went and I visited them, and then we ended up as investors in Chegg, and Chegg's now $1.1 billion market cap company. So I think sometimes when that stuff happens, you just have to be opportunistic, you have to be open, and then you have to have a sense of like, does that really make sense? My more recent investments, my last 2 investments are both in IT. So I've invested in a company called SkyCure, which is in mobile defense, mobile threat defense. I did an investment in a company called MobileIron, which went public a few years ago. And MobileIron does mobile device management, and SkyCure then protects the data basically on the devices and protects the devices themselves. So very strong Israeli founding team, and they were just getting started like on the market side of it, but like for me, I've made all my net worth on strong product people. Reed Hastings, Mark Gainey, like strong product people. And so these were really strong product people. And so though they didn't have the proof yet, I wanted to be involved in them, so I've invested in them. And then I've invested in another company that is still in stealth, but they're applying artificial intelligence to security. So one of the things that's happening with all these security threats, just wave after wave after wave of threats, companies just can't hire enough people. They're hiring tens of thousands of people to do what's called level 1, level 2, and level 3 security. What these guys have done is they've created a solution, and it's a very, very skilled team that I've known for a long time. They've created a solution that allows you to eliminate a lot of the people associated with these level 1, level 2 threats, so that artificial intelligence and machine learning can help you do that for you. And then people can focus on the really, really hard problems instead. And so those are the last 2 investments I've made, and both of those are in IT.
Great. So I believe Foundation Capital actually had 23 IPOs, is that correct? And also many different...
27. But
27 now?
Close enough.
I just did the Google search actually.
Well, that's good. It's on our website.
27 now, wow. Okay, and many exit as well, acquisitions as well. So how did you identify those companies? How do you recognize this company as a potential to be a multi-billion-dollar company can have potential?
So I think that's a great question. I get that question all the way from high school up to business school and these type of things. And usually I do it on the whiteboard, but I'll get arrested because it's graffiti if you do it on one of these walls, I think. So, but what I describe for people is really kind of like it's like an inverted triangle, right? And so if you think about it this way, if you draw sort of a pyramid upside down, and then in the case of Foundation Capital, we're a medium-sized venture firm, right? So we're not a money warehouse. We don't have, $2 billion in our current fund. We have $325 million in our current fund. So if you look at this inverted warehouse or inverted pyramid, up here at the top is really the pipeline. And for us, we get exposed to probably 2,000 or 3,000 companies a year at the top, like that are just coming in. And what will happen is I just met who's got the gentleman that's got the car display? You see here, the one that I was just chatting with? Yeah, the gentleman there, very, very good pitch man. So he's got a really fun company that does this really cool car display on the side window, like you're driving along and all of a sudden you're watching an ad. Probably dangerous, but that's a whole other thing. So.
It's not going to be video.
Yeah, but it caught my eye. So that's one of the 3,000 companies we're going to get exposed to this year, right? All the way to ones that we take all the way through diligence. And we invest in about 10 or 12 out of those 2,000 or 3,000 companies. It's just the nature of what we do. And when we make the investment, the thing that makes a difference between the company being up here and working its way through the pipeline and coming out the bottom of the pipeline being a successful investment are really 3 categories that we're looking for, 3 strata. And the first one, and sometimes I do this in Q&A, but it's too big of a group. The first one is market, right? So the first question we have is, are you going to be involved in a large market opportunity? So personally for me, when I look at Peerspace, the market for events, anybody have any idea what the market for events is in the United States? Just the United States alone, $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year in events. So, and think about it, every single person here is probably going to 6 to 12 events a year. And all those, they cost way more than you think, I can tell you that. So that's a big market, and nobody's really organized that at the venture level. So we thought that was interesting. Mobile security, right? So there are, I don't know what now, probably close to 2.5 billion of these that are active every year from various levels, and all of them are vulnerable to threats. And so that's a big market opportunity. And these other things are big market opportunities. So we look for the size of market. Then we look for the technology. We used to just say technology, but then we did Netflix, and now we say technology or idea, right? Because we're trying to figure out if the business model is different. So when we invested in Lending Club, for peer-to-peer lending, I mean, yes, there was some technology, but really mostly it was the power of the idea. Could people go on a platform as investors and put money in, and then borrowers and put money in, and do it without a bank? Could that work? And the answer, of course, now is yes, in a big way. So technology or an idea, and then the last leg is people. And the reason we put people third in that is not that we don't think people are important. We organize it in the order in which we can change, right? So we're a medium-sized venture firm. We can't create a market, right? We can't tell you that you're not going to use Apple, but you're going to use Xiaomi phones, right? We can't tell you that. We have to believe that Xiaomi phones are big enough to build a market around that we should be investing there. And so we can't change the market. It's hard to change the technology or the business model. It's possible, but it's hard. And it's not that it's easy to change the people. Emotionally, it's very challenging and very difficult to change the people. But you can change the people. And about half the time we do, whether it's us or anybody else in venture. So if you're a founder and you're thinking, gee, I just can't wait to go raise venture capital, you're rolling the dice. You got a 50-50 chance that you're going to be the person running the company in 2 years. So you just have to factor that into your thinking. I counsel a lot of young entrepreneurs not to take venture capital. Because I say, look, if you can sell your company in 2 years to Google for $10 or $20 million, why not you keep 40%, the other guy keeps 40%, just keep borrowing from mom and dad until you get sold, if that's your destiny. But if you're going to create something big, then you need venture capital, and then you're going to need private equity, you're going to need public markets, if you're going to be Airbnb, you're going to be Uber, you need massive amounts of capital over time. And so you got to start somewhere, and venture capital is a good place to start. So that's kind of how we look at it. The final note I'd say, and I apologize for the length of this answer, is that the hardest thing for us is not when it's an obviously large market opportunity. Okay, event marketplace is really large, right? But like, for example, we invested in Netflix, we started our diligence in 1998, and then we invested in 1999. At that time, the time we invested, DVD penetration, which was a condition for success for Netflix, was about 2% in the US market. And so our thesis was, what if it gets to 20%? If it gets to 20%, we could have this successful little company that's going to do this cute thing where they're going to mail DVDs back and forth, right? And we also believed that Reed Hastings was a pretty formidable entrepreneur even back then, before then, because we'd known him. And so my partner Mike Hsu kind of made that bet. Now, of course, what happened was DVDs became the most successful consumer product ever up to their point in time, penetrated 98% of US households. And then Netflix took off, and of course Netflix was never DVD by mail, it was Netflix. It's one of the most talented group of software engineers I've ever seen assembled, and they intended to disrupt the content market from the very first day.
First of all, founder, you said you talk with many young entrepreneurs. What type of entrepreneurs you see more have better chance to succeed? Maybe on different angles, what type of entrepreneurs had impressed you a lot?
Yeah, so there's so much work, and in fact, we just recently had an offsite where we spent 2 hours just on this topic. Like, what are we looking for in a founder? Because even after 21 years in business, we've lost ridiculous amounts of money on really bad founders. The worst founders are the ones that can raise money. They can raise money even if they don't have a good thing going on. And sometimes they're dishonest, sometimes they're just delusional, but those are dangerous. You can lose a lot of money with people like that. We'd rather fail early than to fail late. So when we look for founders, for me, I'm so influenced by my operating career. I lean more on that than I do on even the venture experience. But the one thing that it comes down to for me is persistence. And you hear that over and over again, but if I look at Reed Hastings, if I look at Mark Aney, when other people would have quit, they didn't. When I would have quit, for sure, I would have quit. Like, Reed Hastings spent 2 years in his bedroom writing the code for Purify. His wife was making like $12,000 a year. As a docent, she was like a guide in a local park, right? And he wasn't taking income. And he was literally like writing code and creating this product. So people like that are heroic to me. And they're not heroic because today they're on the cover of Forbes magazine. They're heroic for what they did back when nobody was watching. And so that's what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for people that have sort of, there's a, oh God, I'm gonna forget the name of the band, but there's a band that's something of the pure of heart. And it's like, that's what works for me. Like, the people that I've managed to get involved with that have helped generate the most wealth for me have been people that are actually pure of heart. They just purely believe in what it is they want to do, and they're just very, very focused about it. And then when all the inevitable problems occur, like I can't raise enough money, or I can't hire that person, or we lost that big contract, whatever it happened to be, they just get up the next day and they just keep going. Now that's, to be fair, and I also try to offer this other side of the story when I'm talking to a group like this, that's dangerous for you as a founder.
Dangerous.
Because sometimes what people will do is they'll have that behavior and they'll have a pure of heart and they'll be persistent and there'll be all these other things, but they're not working on a very good idea. So like, take the time to listen to people and really objectively measure, are you working on something that's a big enough idea that it warrants you dedicating the next 5 years of your life to that? And if it does, then it's great. I'll make a comment. When I left Pure Software, and I was looking at a bunch of things. So when I went to Pure Software, nobody knew who I was. So we just hired me because he hired everybody he knew, because nobody else would come work there at the time because there was no money. But when I went to go do the interviews that resulted in me going to Kana, at that point I was kind of made, right? I'd already been public. I had been part of the team that had made this company valuable. So all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, you're great. It's like I'm the same person I was 4 years ago. It's just now I have an IPO, right? But you're great. We want you to be the CEO of this company. We want you to be this. We want you to be that. And I remember I sat down with Reed, and because we both left Pure by then, and I said, look, you know, I'm contemplating my next move, you know, and I valued his opinion. I said, what do you think? And he said, well, what is your criteria? And I said, well, I'm looking at the title, you know, I'm looking at the compensation package, and other bullshit that was not appropriate, right? Was not the right thing. And he said, what are you doing? He said, you got to focus on the people. Like, you're going to spend the next 2 or 3 years of your life with these people. There's a pretty reasonable chance you're going to fail. So why not get involved with people that you want to be around, and that you value and you respect and things like that. And so I don't come from an elite education. I went to state school, state school, state school. I just kept going back. I went to 7 of them. And so I'm not the person that says to you, I've got to have the top 3% graduate from fill-in-the-blank school, because that's never worked for me. But when I got that advice from Reed Hastings, like almost my very next interview was at Kana. And I went to Kana. I was introduced there by Andy Ratcliffe, who was at Benchmark at that time. It was one of Benchmark's first investments. And they couldn't meet me during the day because they were too busy. And so they said, can you come at 7 o'clock at night? And I was like, oh, good sign, right? It's good sign number 1. And then I went to meet with them. They were in a shit box. They were in, we called it the crack house. In fact, every place I've ever been a startup was called the crack house. I don't know, that was like, it was Pure Software. We called our first office a crack house too. So this place was, it doesn't exist anymore. It's where the car wash is by Town and Country Shopping Center. They tore down the building that was there. And I walked in, and it was like the floors were uneven. You know there were rats there somewhere, right? It was just a question of where. And it was 1997, so there were canyons of Dell boxes, right? Because that was what you did at the time. You just bought these giant Dell, you know, workstations. That was the state of the art. And so I had to snake my way through these Dell boxes. Room was full, like 15 people, all like 12 years old, but they're all working. And I had to find my way back, and I'm like, which one of you is the CEO? And I was like, that's me. That was Mark Ganey, and then Mike Wolf's next to him, and all these guys that are now just awesome. And so my initial instinct was, you guys have persistence. You're going to be high quality people for me to spend my time with. And so my role had changed by then. I became sort of the adult on the field trip because I was 34, and the average age of the company when I joined was probably 26. So that was it. And then I got started with them, and then that went like a house of fire.
Let's talk about people again. So I think this is a very important subject I want to dig into. But before I do that, I want how many of you are full-time founders? Raise your hand. Full-time founders, entrepreneurs. Great, that's about half of them. So how many of them are part-time or future founders?
Good.
Okay,
Great.
That's great. So 2014-15 is a summer of the startups, so many people get funding easily.
Yeah.
And since Q4 2015 until last year was like winters, very slow, and this Q1 this year started bump up.
Yeah.
Were your standard of rating people change during the different business seasons?
That's a very insightful question. It's actually more just what's hard in venture is that the returns correlate negatively to the environment you just talked about, right? So the returns typically, when if you're investing in a company in 1999, when everybody feels great, that's a terrible time to be doing early stage venture. It was one of the worst vintages in the history, and I know a little bit about the history of the business. I did this movie called Something Venture about the history of the business. And so that was one of the worst years you could do it. And at that time, everybody felt great about themselves. Everybody was full of piss and vinegar, going into meetings. Yeah, I demand a $200 million valuation because the guy down the street got 150 and I deserve more and all this stuff. So that's a terrible time to be an investor. So I started my career 3 weeks after 9/11, which of course was an international tragedy. But the quality of the companies that I saw as an investor over the next 6 to 9 months, I saw, my first week, I saw a company called Godspeed, which later turned into Ironport. So Scott Weiss, who went on to AH, and I've been on the advisory board there. And then I saw Guidewire. I saw Ironport on day 1 and Guidewire on day 5 of my venture career. And the two of those combined ended up being worth about $5.5 billion. And they were dirt cheap. I could have done either one of them for just ridiculous price. Very high quality entrepreneurs. So when I'd explain this to people, when I go back and do like CNBC, or if I'm talking to people in Europe or in Asia, my personal opinion is entrepreneurialism is a gene. It's like it's something that you just have. For me, I didn't discover it until I was 30 years old. But it's just something that's in you, that has to come out. It's like, I have friends now who are artists and musicians and things like that, and I think it's a very similar analog to being an artist and musician. You have to create. And entrepreneurs have to found. They have to create new businesses. And they create them metronomically. They create them whether the environment's high or whether the environment's low. When you choose to invest is up to you as the investor. And so for us in 2014, we had one of our slowest years in recent times because we just kept seeing mediocre company after mediocre company that demanded really high valuations. Then we got very active once the market started to drop down because now the arbitrage has switched back to our favor from that perspective. So we think about those things a little bit. But I always tell people, I mean, Pure Software got funded initially. Well, we tried for 6 months to get somebody to put money in. We couldn't get them to put it in. If you go back and look at the red herring for Pure Software, you see like Will Hastings and Edna Hastings and Joan Hastings, and you see a lot of family members that are in there. I mean, it effectively took Reed 2 years to raise $200,000, and he gave away about 10% of the company to do it. But then once the product came out, it was such a rocket ship that people just couldn't, venture firms couldn't wait to get in at that point.
Great, that's amazing insight information. I would like to open the floor for some questions since our time is limited.
Yes, please.
I'd like to just ask a couple of questions and then let Paul decide to give a summary answer.
There you
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I have a technology company that I've been working on for almost 15 years.
Okay.
And I'm going to use a standard technology so it's easy to pitch. But
Yeah.
we build teleporters.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is we go to a company and we say, we build teleporters. And they say, no you don't.
Yeah.
There's no way you build teleporters. Give them a demo. We beam something across the room. They say, doesn't work. Even though they can see it.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that as an entrepreneur? And on the flip side, as an investor, how do you evaluate that we aren't the next Theranos?
Can you take 2 more questions and
Sure,
do a summary
yeah.
answer?
Yeah, okay.
Who's next?
Yeah, you mentioned about the capital, market capital, how you look for. So what's your minimum size you look for? What's the minimum boundary line you're looking for? Above that, you would invest.
You mean like how small of an investment will we make?
And not the market size of the,
Market size.
Oh, okay, I'll answer that differently.
One more question.
There you go. Here, there's somebody here.
Question. How much are you offering a helping hand in raising the bridge financing if you like the deal but it's too early for them?
Okay, so let's do that one first. Never. Bridge financing is defined as some investor got stuck in a project and they can't raise money. So that's not for us. Now, we do seed level financing, like we do down to $100,000 on companies that are getting started. But we only do it if we think that ultimately the company will meet our criteria, that triangle that we talked about earlier. So we don't invest in something small and just put less money in it, right? We just don't do that. And then the second point was around the size of market. I was having that discussion with a colleague earlier today. Every entrepreneur believes that what they're working on is going to be a really large market. If I look at a company like Yelp, right? So Yelp goes out and says, we're going to automate restaurants, going out, maybe hotels, things like that on your phone. It's a really, really large market. If somebody comes out and says, I'm just making this up, we're going to automate breakfast on your phone, that's not as big a market, right? So I'm not as interested in the guy who's going to automate breakfast. I'm interested in the person who's going to automate like a big market from that perspective. So we see people spending a lot of time, and I've done this personally. Like I've helped write business plans, for these things. And like, is it a $3 billion TAM? Is it a $4 billion TAM? Whatever. We don't pay that much attention to that. We make our own judgment based on what we're hearing from people. and some of it's based on experience. Sometimes we'll invest in markets that we know. Security, for example. Security is a relatively constrained market, but it's incredibly liquid, right? So, you know, we'll invest in security sometimes just knowing that we're trying to skate to where the puck is going, you know, using a hockey analogy, and that works, that model works. In other cases, we'll look at something and just say that we think it's going to be really, really large. If I look at my partner, Steve Vassallo, he does really kind of non-linear investments, like really out there sort of stuff, which I think is great. And so he did, his first investment was in a solar as a service company before that market was understood. And he put $8 million for 35% of the company, ended up being worth about $1.5 billion. Because his belief was, gee, is solar energy going to be a big market? Yes. And, you know, once these other kind of situations are fixed around it, and so it worked. He did another company called Bolt Threads. That's a really cool company if you haven't followed it. And at the time, zero interest from a single other person in venture capital. But what he was tracking this space, and these guys had invented, or they cracked the genome for spider silk. So he was tracking 3 or 4 teams around the world that were trying to do this, and he found the guys that were doing it in Berkeley. And now it's called Bolt Threads. So they're going to revolutionize the fabric market. They're the next Gore-Tex or spandex. So I think we own 35% of the company for $4 million in that case. Now, when we went to try to raise more money, which I had a conversation with another colleague earlier about the importance of being able to raise the next money, crickets, nothing, nobody, no interest. And then eventually we found another venture capitalist who had a PhD in synthetic biology, and he was like, I totally get what these guys are doing. This is a platform for the next generation of fabrics, and they'll be made in vats of protein. So we funded that company, we still own 20% of it, and now it's off and running in that sense, right, from there. And then the final question there was on the teleporter thing. I mean, I love the concept of a teleporter, and I'd love to see the demo, so I'll give you my card, just so you piqued my interest from that perspective.
I'm talking to Bunny on Tuesday.
Yeah, oh, okay, good, all right, great. Well, that's even better at some level, because of the kind of stuff that he's gonna do.
I'll take you.
The thing that, okay, there you go. Do you have a teleporter too? No, okay, so.
We're doing beamforming though.
Oh, okay, yeah, beamforming. I've seen the movie a little bit. We can talk about it. If you come off to somebody in my world as somebody that's a bit of a kook, then you're going to struggle, right? Unless you find that one person, you know. So I think of Steve Jurvetson that way. Like, Steve is a guy that he just thinks differently, right? And he figures out, oh, we're going to do this thing, and it's going to involve satellites. I'm like, really? I mean, is that a venture-funded thing? All day long for him, and he's made a very successful career with that. So I think in that instance, when you're working on something that's really out there a little bit, you got to like just find your audience. If you're looking at a, you know, meat and potatoes venture capitalist that's just looking for the next security company or looking for the next whatever, they're probably just not going to go down that path. And then, you know, then you just kind of have to ask yourself the question: okay, am I working on something that's going to work, you know, as a business, right?
Okay, great. That's great comment. Let's give a big hand to Paul.